They sat the boy with the servants to shame him. The gesture was a blade, meant to carve a line between the blood of the house and the filth they imagined ran in his veins. Julian Beaumont, with a smile as thin and sharp as a shard of glass, had directed the housekeeper with a flick of his wrist. "The child will be more comfortable there," he had said, his voice carrying across the polished oak of the dining hall a silken cord of malice. Among his own kind. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, said nothing. He watched from the head of the long, imposing table, a place he had occupied for 5 hollow years. He saw the boy, Thomas, a small, serious figure with hair the color of wheat, and eyes a startling, familiar blue, being led to a small side table near the kitchens. He saw the flush on the housekeeper's cheeks, the pity in the footman's eyes. He saw it all through a haze of claret and suffocating regret. The boy did not cry. He did not protest. He simply took his seat, his small back, ramrod straight, a miniature lord in a world determined to make him a peasant. Eleanor watched from the doorway, a ghost in her own memory. She was no longer Lady Eleanor, Duchess of Blackwood. She was Mrs. Croft, a laundress from a forgotten village, her hands chapped and red, her gown a simple gray wool. She had been summoned here under a false pretense, a cruel trick orchestrated by the Duke, her husband, the man who had cast her out, the man who now sat in judgment over her son. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had taught Thomas dignity. She had taught him resilience. She prayed it would be enough. The room was a cavern of opulence, dripping with crystal and gilded with disdain. A fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth a lie against the glacial chill of the atmosphere. The smell of beeswax and roast beef mingled with the faint, cloying scent of Julian's cologne. Outside, a winter rain lashed against the tall, mullioned windows, each drop a tiny fist beating against the glass. Alistair felt the weight of his title, of the house, of the 5 years of silence. It was a shroud he wore every day. His life since Eleanor had vanished was an exercise in emptiness. His second marriage, arranged by Julian to a woman of impeccable lineage and utter vapidity, had produced no heir and no comfort. The halls of Blackwood Manor, once merely quiet, now echoed with a profound and aching loneliness. He had begun to suspect, in the small dark hours of the morning, that he had been a fool, a proud, blind, monumental fool. That was why he had sent for her. He had to know. Julian raised his wine-glass. "A toast," he began, his eyes glittering as he glanced toward the servants' table. "To family, and to the purity of the line." The words were another calculated cruelty. Alistair's hand tightened on the stem of his own glass. He was about to speak, to put a stop to this monstrous theater, when the small boy at the side table folded his hands. Silence fell, thick and sudden. Even the servants paused, their movements arrested. Thomas bowed his head. His voice, clear and high and utterly devoid of fear, filled the cavernous room. "For the earth that gives, for the hands that toil, for the light that guides us from the coil. May our hearts be true and our spirits blessed, and in this house may all find rest." Alistair froze. The wineglass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the stone floor. The sound was a gunshot in the stillness. Red wine bled across the ancient flagstones like a mortal wound. He did not feel the splash against his immaculate trousers. He did not hear Julian's sharp intake of breath or the gasps from the guests. All he could hear was the echo of that prayer. Those words, "For the light that guides us from the coil." It was not a common grace. It was not a prayer from any book. It was a strange, almost pagan verse his own father, the old Duke, had composed, a man known for his eccentricities and his deep love of the land. He had taught it to Alistair as a boy. It was a family secret, a piece of their private history, spoken only at their most intimate family meals. Alistair had not heard it, had not even thought of it, in 20 years. He stared at the boy with Eleanor's wheat-colored hair, the boy with eyes the exact shade of blue as the portrait of the old Duke hanging in the gallery. His father's eyes, and his father's words. The truth did not dawn. It struck him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs, the pride from his bones. He saw Julian's face, the flicker of panic in his eyes before it was masked by a sneer. He saw Eleanor in the doorway, her face pale but her expression fierce, a lioness guarding her cub, and he realized, with a nausea so profound it threatened to bring him to his knees, that he had not been betrayed by his wife. He had been betrayed by his brother. 5 years earlier, the gilded cage of Blackwood Manor had been suffocating Eleanor. The marriage, a celebrated union between the powerful Duke of Blackwood and the beautiful Lady Eleanor Ainsworth, had been a hollow thing from its first month. Alistair was a man walled off from the world, encased in the armor of his title. He was not cruel in his actions, but in his absence. He was a phantom in his own home, his time consumed by estate matters, politics, and the constant, whispering presence of his younger brother, Julian. Julian was Alistair's shadow, a man who possessed all the ducal ambition, with none of the responsibility. He was charming on the surface, his words like honey, but his eyes held a reptilian stillness. He had positioned himself as Alistair's most trusted advisor, and he used that trust to isolate Eleanor. He intercepted her letters, twisted her words, and sowed seeds of doubt in Alistair's mind with practiced ease. "She is delicate, Alistair," Julian would say, his tone one of feigned concern. "Her sensibilities are not suited to the robust life of a duchess. She finds your duties a bore." Alistair, emotionally clumsy and accustomed to deferring to his brother's social acumen, had absorbed the poison drip by insidious drip. He saw Eleanor's quiet despair not as a symptom of her loneliness, but as proof of her inadequacy. He withdrew further, leaving her to the echoing silence of the long galleries and the company of Julian's cutting remarks. The oppression was a sensory assault. The air in the formal rooms was always thick with the scent of potpourri and old, decaying roses, a smell of beautiful things dying slowly. The rustle of silk gowns felt like the slithering of snakes. The eyes of the portraits on the walls seemed to follow her, their painted gazes as judgmental as the society that had placed her here. She felt less a duchess and more a prize sow, valued for her breeding potential and nothing else. Her only solace was the sprawling, untamed grounds of the estate. She would escape the suffocating interiors for the honest scent of damp earth and wild mint. It was on one of these walks that she began to feel the first subtle shifts in her own body, a morning queasiness, a profound, bone-deep weariness, a strange new sensitivity to smells. She knew, with a jolt of terror and fierce, secret joy, she knew she was with child, Alistair's child, the heir to Blackwood. She decided to wait for the perfect moment to tell him. She imagined it would be the bridge that finally connected their two separate islands. This child would be the anchor that secured their marriage, the warmth that would finally thaw the frost of her husband's heart. She clutched the secret to her chest like a precious coal, a source of private heat in the cold expanse of her life. She never got the chance. The shattering came on a Tuesday. The sky was a sheet of gray slate, threatening a storm. Alistair had been in London for a week, and Eleanor felt his absence as a relief, a brief lifting of pressure. But his return was heralded by a summons to his study, a room she rarely entered. She found him standing by the window, his back to her. Julian was there, of course, perched on the edge of a leather armchair like a vulture waiting for a meal. The air was electric with a tension so thick she could taste it. "Your Grace," she began, her voice uncertain. Alistair turned. His face was a mask of stone, his eyes chips of ice. He looked not at her, but through her. "I have returned to find my house in disarray," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "My name a topic of sordid gossip." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I do not understand." "Do you not?" He gestured to a small, rosewood box on his desk. Julian has been most diligent in my absence. He has uncovered a most unpleasant truth." Julian rose, his expression a perfect blend of sorrow and duty. "Eleanor, I am so sorry," he murmured, his insincerity a physical offense. He opened the box. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with a blue ribbon. "They are love letters," Alistair stated, the words falling like stones into a well. "Addressed to you, from Captain Montgomery." Captain Montgomery was a distant cousin, a cheerful, harmless man she had danced with once at a ball 3 months ago. The accusation was so absurd, so utterly preposterous, that she almost laughed. But the look on Alistair's face stopped her. He believed it. "These are forgeries," she said, her voice shaking. "Alistair, you cannot possibly think—" "I also have the word of a footman," Alistair cut her off, his voice like the crack of a whip. "He saw the captain leaving your private garden late one evening last week." "That is a lie!" Her shock was turning to a hot, righteous anger. "This is Julian's doing. Can you not see? He has always sought to undermine me." Alistair's gaze flickered to his brother. Julian merely spread his hands, a picture of wounded innocence. "Why would I do such a thing? You are my sister. I have only ever tried to help you adjust." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Alistair's pride, his greatest and most terrible flaw, could not permit him to believe he had been manipulated. It was far easier to believe his quiet, withdrawn wife was deceitful. "You will remove yourself from my sight," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "You will be confined to your rooms until I decide what is to be done with you." The moment of annihilation was not loud. It was a profound and terrifying silence that fell inside her. The anger, the fear, the disbelief, it all collapsed inward, leaving a cold, dead void. It was the feeling of falling from a great height, the world rushing up to meet you. She looked at the man she had married, the father of the child growing inside her, and saw a stranger, a cold, cruel stranger who had judged and condemned her without a trial. The nausea that had been her secret companion for weeks rose in her throat, acidic and real. She did not faint. She did not scream. She simply turned, her back straight, and walked out of the room. The click of the closing door was the sound of a life ending. Her life as the Duchess of Blackwood was over. That night she made her decision. It was not a choice born of weakness, but of a sudden, crystalline clarity. To stay was to be entombed. To stay was to allow Julian and Alistair to control the fate of her child, to perhaps even deny its legitimacy. She would not allow it. Her child would be born free of this poison, this gilded rot. She moved with a quiet, desperate efficiency. She did not pack the silks or the satins. She left the diamond necklaces and the pearl earrings in their velvet boxes. On the nightstand, she placed her wedding ring, the heavy gold band now feeling like a manacle. She let it fall from her finger, the quiet thud on the polished wood a final, definitive severance. Instead, she pulled a simple, sturdy traveling dress of dark wool from the back of her wardrobe. She took no mementos, no sentimental trinkets. Her past was an anchor, and she was cutting the rope. But she was not a fool. She went to her private secretaire, the one containing the allowance Alistair provided, a generous sum she had barely touched. She took all the cash, a thick bundle of notes, and secreted it in a hidden pocket inside her cloak. It was not theft. It was severance. It was survival. In the deepest hour of the night, when the house was still and the rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, she slipped out. She did not use the grand staircase, but the narrow, winding steps of the servants' quarters, a path she had never walked before. The air here smelled of soap and boiled cabbage, the honest smells of labor. It felt cleaner than the perfumed decay of the rooms above. She let herself out a small side door into the kitchen's garden. The damp air was a shock, cold and clean against her face. It felt like the first breath after being held under water. She did not look back at the looming silhouette of Blackwood Manor, a great stone beast sleeping in the darkness. She walked, her pace quick and sure, down the long drive and onto the public road, melting into the pre-dawn gloom. She had no destination, only a direction. Away. 5 years passed, 5 winters of biting wind, 5 summers of hard-won sun. The world forgot Lady Eleanor, Duchess of Blackwood. It was assumed she had died in some discreet foreign convent, a convenient and tidy end to an embarrassing scandal. In the remote coastal village of Oakhaven, a place of granite cliffs and perpetually damp air, a woman known as Mrs. Croft ran a small but immaculate laundry service from the back of her rented cottage. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now chapped and strong. Her face had lost its aristocratic delicacy, honed by wind and worry into a different kind of beauty, one of strength and resilience. She was respected in the village for her quiet dignity and her fierce devotion to her son, Thomas. Thomas was her world. He was a bright, serious child, with his father's startling blue eyes and her own thoughtful nature. He knew no life but this one, a life of simple meals, mended clothes, and the constant, reassuring presence of his mother. He knew nothing of dukes or titles or the great stone house that was his birthright. Eleanor had built a wall of love and labor around him, a fortress against the past. Her only true friend was Mrs. Gable, the village midwife who had delivered Thomas and had become a surrogate grandmother to him. She was a woman as sturdy as the coastal oaks, her wisdom practical and her loyalty absolute. She knew Eleanor was more than she seemed, but she never asked. She judged people by their character, not their history. Life was hard. The work was endless, the steam from the laundry tubs filling the small cottage, clinging to the walls, making everything feel perpetually damp. The smell of lye soap was ingrained in her skin, but it was an honest life. It was a real life. There were days of bone-deep exhaustion, when the loneliness was a physical ache. But then Thomas would wrap his small arms around her neck, or she would watch him sleeping, his face peaceful in the candlelight, and she knew she had made the right choice. She was poor, she was tired, but she was free, and her son was safe. Meanwhile, at Blackwood Manor, the Duke of Blackwood was drowning in silence. The house was a mausoleum. His new wife, Lady Beatrice, was a beautiful, brittle creature who cared only for London seasons and the latest French fashions. Their conversations were stilted, their dinners exercises in mutual boredom. The marriage was a cold, barren contract. There was no heir. The nursery remained empty, a silent reproach. Alistair was haunted. The ghost of Eleanor walked the halls with him. He saw her in the curve of a vase, in the scent of rain on the flagstones, in the empty space beside him in the vast, cold bed. The anger and pride that had fueled his decision 5 years ago had long since burned away, leaving behind the cold ashes of regret. The first crack in his certainty had appeared a year after she left. A former footman, dismissed for drunkenness, had confessed in a gin-soaked stupor to a stable hand that Mr. Julian had paid him a fortune to lie about seeing Captain Montgomery in the Duchess's garden. The story made its way, as all gossip eventually does, to the Duke. Alistair had confronted Julian. His brother had laughed it off, a masterful performance of indignation. "Alistair, you cannot give credence to the ramblings of a bitter, drunken lout. The man is trying to wound me, to wound us for his dismissal." Alistair had wanted to believe him. It was easier. But the seed of doubt had been planted. It grew slowly, a dark vine wrapping itself around his heart. He started watching Julian more closely. He saw the flicker of triumph in his brother's eyes when a potential investment of Alistair's failed. He noticed how Julian subtly steered him away from old friends and loyal retainers, isolating him further. 2 months ago, the doubt had become a certainty. He had found, tucked away in an old ledger of household accounts, a receipt from a stationer in London. It was for a specific type of expensive Italian paper and a matching ink. The date on the receipt was from the week before he had cast Eleanor out. He remembered the letters Julian had shown him, the color of the paper, the shade of the ink. They matched. It was a small thing, but it was enough. The entire edifice of Julian's loyalty crumbled into dust. Alistair had hired a man, a discreet and relentless investigator from London named Mr. Finch. He had given him one instruction: find the truth of what happened 5 years ago, and find Eleanor. Mr. Finch was good at his work. He had tracked the disgraced footman to a debtor's prison. He had found the forger who had penned the letters, a man now living in comfortable retirement on Julian's coin. And, through a painstaking process of following the trail of a woman of noble bearing selling a small, insignificant brooch years ago, he had traced Eleanor to the coastal village of Oakhaven. Alistair had received the report 2 days ago. He had read it in his study, the same room where he had destroyed his own life. The words on the page were a catalogue of his failure, his blindness, his unforgivable pride. He had not just wronged Eleanor. He had allowed his own brother to orchestrate her ruin, and he had been the willing executioner. He had left for Oakhaven the next morning, telling no one but his valet where he was going. He did not know what he would say. He did not know if she would even see him. He only knew that he had to try. He had to breathe the same air she breathed, to stand on the ground she walked. He had to begin the impossibly long journey of undoing the damage he had done. He found her standing in a small, windswept yard, hanging laundry on a line. The sight of her struck him with the force of a physical blow. She was thinner, and the lines of her face were sharper, but she was more beautiful than he remembered. The wind whipped strands of her wheat-colored hair across her face, and she pushed them back with a hand that was red and raw from work. She moved with an economy of motion, a strength that was entirely new. This was not the fragile, wilting duchess he had imagined. This was a woman forged in fire. And then he saw the boy. The child was playing near her feet, meticulously arranging a line of smooth, gray stones. He looked up as Alistair's carriage rattled to a stop at the end of the lane. The boy's eyes, a brilliant, piercing blue, met his. Alistair's heart stopped. It was like looking at a portrait of his own father. It was like looking in a mirror from a lifetime ago. He stepped down from the carriage, his legs unsteady. Eleanor had turned, her face instantly shuddering, becoming a mask of cold, hard stone. She placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was not the soft melody he remembered. It was low and rough, like the shingle on the beach. "Eleanor?" He breathed her name. It felt foreign on his tongue. I had to see you." "You have seen me," she said, her tone utterly flat. "Now you can leave." "Please," he took a step forward. "We must talk." "We have nothing to talk about," she retorted, pulling her son closer. "You made your position clear 5 years ago." The boy, Thomas, looked from his mother's tense face to the tall, imposing stranger. He was not afraid, only curious. "Mama," he whispered, "who is that man?" The question hung in the air between them, a chasm of lost years. Before Eleanor could answer, before Alistair could find the words to respond to a question that tore him apart, the sound of another carriage, driven hard and fast, echoed down the lane. It was Julian. He had followed him. Of course he had. Julian stepped down from his carriage, his polished boots sinking slightly into the mud. His face was a mask of pleasant surprise, but his eyes were chips of ice as they took in the scene. Eleanor, the boy, Alistair standing frozen between them. "Alistair, there you are," Julian called out, his voice a smooth, false balm. "You left in such a hurry. I was worried. I see you have found a local acquaintance." His gaze swept over Eleanor with dismissive contempt, then landed on Thomas. His smile tightened. Alistair felt a surge of pure, cold rage. "Julian, what a surprise. I thought I might join you." "This sea air must be bracing," Julian said, his eyes never leaving the boy. He approached, his charm a weapon. "And who is this little fellow?" Eleanor's hand on Thomas's shoulder was like a claw. "He is my son." Your son, Julian repeated slowly, savoring the words. He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's level. Alistair wanted to pull him away, to smash the condescending smile from his face, but he was paralyzed by the unfolding nightmare. A fine-looking boy. What is your name? Thomas, the boy said, his voice clear. Thomas, Julian mused. A strong name. And how old are you, Thomas? I'm almost 5. Julian's eyes flickered to Alistair, a silent, triumphant message. Almost 5. The timing was perfect. The lie was perfect. He straightened up, his expression one of theatrical pity directed at his brother. Well, it seems Mrs. Croft has been busy since leaving Blackwood. The insult was deliberate, designed to reinforce the old lie, to paint Eleanor as a fallen woman, and the child as proof of her sin. Alistair found his voice. That is enough, Julian. Is it? Julian's voice was soft, but it carried a razor's edge. Brother, I understand your curiosity, but this is hardly a dignified spectacle. We are attracting attention. He gestured vaguely toward the village, where a few curtains were twitching. Let us retire to the inn. We can arrange for the woman and her child to be given a meal, a gesture of charity. It was a trap, and Alistair walked right into it. He was so disoriented, so desperate to get Eleanor out of the cold wind and away from Julian's venom, that he agreed. It was a fatal mistake. He thought he could control the situation. He thought he could protect her. He was still, even now, a fool. The inn was small, but clean, with a large common room dominated by a roaring fire. Julian, with the innate arrogance of his class, took charge immediately. He spoke to the innkeeper in low tones, pressing coins into his hand. Alistair tried to speak to Eleanor, but she would not look at him. She held Thomas's hand in a grip of iron, her face a pale, set mask. When the time came for the evening meal, the innkeeper's wife approached them, her face a mixture of embarrassment and apology. Your Grace, she said to Alistair, Mr. Beaumont has arranged for your dinner to be served in the private parlor. She hesitated. And he has instructed that the boy is to take his meal at the servants' table, by the kitchens. And so they sat the boy with the servants to shame him. The moment the grace was spoken, the world shifted on its axis. The shattered glass, the spreading stain of wine, the collective gasp of the room. It was all a distant noise, a dull roar in Alistair's ears. The only thing that was real was the boy's face, earnest and innocent, and the echo of his father's words. My father's words, Alistair whispered, the realization of physical agony. How do you know those words? Thomas looked at him, his blue eyes wide. My mama taught me. She said they were special words for remembering. Remembering. Alistair's gaze shot to Eleanor, who stood frozen in the doorway. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw not triumph, but 5 years of pain, of struggle, of a dignity he had tried to strip from her. She had kept a piece of his family, his history, alive in secret. She'd given it to his son, their son. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, toward his brother. Julian's face was ashen. The mask of charm had finally cracked, revealing the ugly, panicked truth beneath. He looked like a cornered rat. You! Alistair's voice was a low growl, a sound of primal fury he did not know he possessed. He rose from his chair, the movement slow and menacing. The scattered guests shrank back. You did this. Alistair, be reasonable, Julian stammered, taking a half-step back. It is a coincidence, a trick. The woman is a charlatan. She must have heard it somewhere. Heard it where? Alistair advanced on him, his shadow falling over his younger brother. From whom? Those words have not been spoken in this house since our father died. I had forgotten them myself. There is no one alive who knew that grace. No one but me." He paused, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "And you?" Julian paled further. I do not recall." "Liar," Alistair spat the word. "You stood beside me at his deathbed. He said them then. He told us to keep them for our own children. For the future of this house." He was standing directly in front of Julian now, close enough to see the sweat beading on his brother's upper lip, to smell the fear coming off him. The carefully constructed world of lies was collapsing, and Julian was being buried in the rubble. "The letters were forgeries," Alistair said, each word a hammer blow. "The footman was paid. The paper was purchased by you in London. I know, Julian. I know everything." Julian's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. The guests stared, transfixed by the raw, brutal drama unfolding before them. The servants by the kitchen door stood like statues, and Eleanor watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the moment of reckoning. But there was no joy in it, only a profound, weary sadness. "She has played you for a fool, brother." Julian tried one last, desperate gambit, his voice regaining a sliver of its old condescending tone. "Can you not see? She and her bastard—" Alistair's fist connected with Julian's jaw. The sound was a sickening crack of bone and cartilage. Julian stumbled backward, crashing into the small servants' table where Thomas still sat. Plates and cutlery clattered to the floor. Julian landed in a heap, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. Thomas, who had watched the entire exchange with wide, unblinking eyes, did not flinch. He simply looked at the man sprawled at his feet, then up at the towering, furious figure of the Duke. Alistair paid his brother no mind. He strode past him, his eyes locked on Eleanor. He stopped a few feet from her, his rage dissolving into a vast, empty landscape of shame. He saw her not as a duchess or a laundress, but as the woman he had loved and failed so profoundly. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raw. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply held his gaze, her expression unreadable. He took another step, then another, until he was standing before her. And then Alistair Beaumont, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, a man who had never bowed to anyone but his sovereign, slowly, deliberately, knelt. He knelt on the cold stone floor of his ancestral home, at the feet of the woman he had cast out. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not offer excuses. He simply knelt, his head bowed, the weight of his guilt a physical force pressing him down. In the ringing silence of the hall, he heard a small sound. It was Thomas, sliding from his chair. The boy walked over to his mother, took her hand, and then looked at the kneeling Duke. "Is he the remembering man, Mama?" Thomas asked. Eleanor looked down at her son, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed her face. Her eyes softened. She placed her free hand on Thomas's head. "Yes," she whispered, her gaze returning to Alistair's bowed head. "I believe he is." The aftermath of the confrontation was a formal, chilling silence. Julian was helped to his feet by 2 footmen, his face a swollen, mottled mess. He did not look at his brother. He directed a look of pure, undiluted hatred at Eleanor, before turning and stalking from the room, his public ruin complete. The remaining guests, sensing the profound shift in the household's gravity, murmured their excuses and fled into the rainy night, eager to spread the tale of the Duke's spectacular fall from grace and his even more spectacular act of penance. Alistair remained on his knees. The stone was cold, seeping through the fine wool of his trousers, a fitting discomfort. He did not dare to look up. He waited for Eleanor's judgment. A word, a blow, a dismissal. He deserved them all. Instead, he heard her voice, quiet but firm. "Get up." He slowly raised his head. She stood before him, her son's hand still clutched in hers. Her face was composed, but her eyes were turbulent, a storm of conflicting emotions. "Not here," she said. "Not like this." She turned and walked back toward the main entrance, her steps sure and steady. She did not look back to see if he was following. She simply expected it. He rose, his joints stiff. He felt 100 years old. He glanced at the servants, who were now studiously avoiding his gaze, pretending to be busy clearing the wreckage. He saw Mrs. Gable, the sturdy woman from the village, standing near the kitchen entrance. She must have come with Eleanor. Her expression was one of stern, cautious evaluation. He had not only Eleanor to answer to, but the entire world she had built without him. He followed her out of the dining hall, through the cavernous, echoing main hall, and into the small, intimate morning room. It was the one room in the house that still held a trace of her, with its simple floral curtains and the books she had left behind. She lit a single lamp, the flame casting long, dancing shadows. Thomas, exhausted by the night's events, had fallen asleep in her arms. She gently laid him on a velvet chaise lounge, pulling an afghan over him. For a moment, she was just a mother tending to her child, her movements filled with the tenderness that made Alistair's heart ache. When she turned back to him, the softness was gone. She was once again a fortress. "You will tell me everything," she commanded. It was not a request. From the beginning, the truth. And so he did. He stood before her, stripped of his pride and his title, and confessed. He told her of Julian's poison, of his own arrogant blindness, of the doubts that had festered for years. He told her of the footman's confession, the stationer's receipt, and the relentless work of Mr. Finch. He laid the entire, sordid conspiracy bare, not as an excuse, but as a testament to the depth of his idiocy. She listened without interruption, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unyielding. The only sound was the ticking of the mantel clock and the soft sigh of the rain against the windows. When he was finished, the silence stretched, taut and heavy. "You believed him," she said finally. The words were not an accusation, but a simple, devastating statement of fact. "You believed the word of a man you knew to be envious and cruel over the wife who had shared your bed. You did not ask. You did not question. You pronounced sentence." "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "My pride would not allow me to think myself so easily duped. It was easier to believe you were false." "And what do you want now?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Do you expect me to thank you for finally uncovering a truth you should have seen from the start? Do you expect me to fall into your arms and return to my post as Duchess, now that my name has been cleared?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I expect nothing. I deserve nothing." He took a step closer, his hands clenched at his sides. "I will not ask for your forgiveness, Eleanor. It is not mine to ask for. But I am asking for a chance to prove that I am not the man I was, a chance to be a father to my son." Her expression flickered at the mention of Thomas. That was her weak point, her only point of vulnerability. "He has a father," she said, her voice hardening again. "He has me. I have been his father and his mother for 5 years. We do not need you." The words were a blade to his heart, but he knew he had earned them. "Perhaps you do not need me," he conceded. "But he deserves a father. He deserves to know who he is. He is the heir to all of this. He is the next Duke of Blackwood." A bitter laugh escaped her. "And what a prize that is! A house full of lies, and a title that brought me nothing but misery. Why would I wish that upon my son?" "Because it can be different," he insisted, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. "We can make it different. I will not leave, Eleanor. I will not go back to London. I am staying here, in Oakhaven." She stared at him, incredulous. "Here? What are you talking about?" "I have dismissed my carriage. I sent my valet away. I am staying at the inn. I will stay for as long as it takes. A month, a year, a lifetime. I will not force myself upon you. I will not demand anything, but I will be here. For you. For him. I will earn my place back in your lives, one day at a time. If you will let me." Her composure finally cracked. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away with an angry gesture. "You think you can just move into the village? The Duke of Blackwood, living at the local inn? Do you know what people will say?" "I no longer care what people say," he replied, his voice firm. "I have spent my entire life caring what people say. It has cost me everything I ever valued. From now on, I care only what you say, and what he thinks." He glanced at the sleeping boy on the chaise. She was silent for a long time, the battle raging within her. Her mind screamed at her to send him away, to protect the fragile peace she had built. But her heart, a foolish, treacherous organ, felt a reluctant flicker of something she had thought long dead. Hope. "Fine," she said at last, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay at the inn, but you will keep your distance. You will not approach me or Thomas unless I permit it. You will make no demands. You are a stranger here, Your Grace. You will act like one." "I will," he promised, the relief so profound it made him dizzy. "Thank you." She gave a short, sharp nod, then turned her back on him, walking over to the window and staring out into the black, wet night. The audience was over. Alistair left the room, his heart a chaotic mix of despair and a terrifying, fragile hope. The path to atonement had begun. It would be the hardest journey of his life. The next morning, the village of Oakhaven awoke to a new reality. The Duke of Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in England, was in residence at the Salty Dog, the local inn. He had taken the best room, a small, clean chamber with a lumpy bed and a view of the fish market, and had paid for a month in advance with cash. He kept his promise. He did not approach Eleanor's cottage. He did not try to speak to her. He simply existed on the periphery of her life. He would take long, solitary walks along the cliffs, the sea spray coating his fine London coat. He took his meals in the common room of the inn, nodding politely to the fishermen and merchants who stared at him with open curiosity. He was a man adrift. Stripped of his duties, his household, his brother, he was forced to simply be. And in the silence, he began to see the world not as a duke, but as a man. He saw the back-breaking labor of the fishermen hauling their nets. He saw the weary kindness of the shopkeepers. He saw the community Eleanor had found, a world away from the gilded treachery of his own. His first act of service was small, almost accidental. He was walking past Eleanor's cottage one afternoon, when he saw her struggling to chop a large, knotted log for her fire. Her small axe made little impression on the wood. He watched for a moment as she fought with it, her face set with determination. Without a word, he walked to the inn stable, borrowed a heavy woodsman's axe, and returned. She looked up, startled as he approached the woodpile. "Allow me," he said, his tone quiet and respectful. She hesitated, her pride warring with her exhaustion. Finally, she gave a curt nod and stepped back, watching him with wary eyes. He took off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and set to work. The crisp, clean scent of split pine filled the air. He was not a man used to manual labor, but he threw himself into the task with a focused intensity. The rhythmic thud of the axe was a kind of penance. With each swing, he felt as though he were chipping away at the hard shell of his own arrogance. Within an hour, he had reduced the entire pile of logs to a neat stack of firewood. He did not wait for thanks. He simply rolled down his sleeves, put on his coat, and walked back to the inn, his hands blistered and aching. The next day, he saw that the gate to her small garden was hanging from a single hinge. He procured a hammer and nails from the innkeeper, and, while she and Thomas were at the market, he repaired it. He made sure the latch was clean and moved smoothly. These small, silent acts became his new language. He was not courting her with jewels or grand pronouncements, but with calluses and sweat. He was showing her, not telling her, that he was willing to do the work. Eleanor watched it all with a guarded heart. Every repaired fence post, every neat stack of wood, was a small assault on the fortress she had built around herself. She told herself it was a performance, a ducal whim, but she saw the genuine weariness in his face at the end of the day. She saw the blisters on his hands when he paid the baker for his bread. This was not the man she had known. The true turning point came with the arrival of Mr. Finch. The investigator arrived in a mud-splattered carriage, a thin, bird-like man with sharp, intelligent eyes. He brought with him a portfolio of documents, the forger's sworn affidavit, the original dismissed footman's testimony, and a detailed accounting of Julian's financial transactions, showing the payoffs. Alistair did not summon Eleanor. He went to her, portfolio in hand, and stood at her newly repaired gate. "Eleanor," he said when she came to the door, "this is for you. It is the proof. You do not need to look at it. But I wanted you to have it, to do with as you see fit." He placed the leather portfolio on the gatepost and walked away. That evening, by the light of her lamp, Eleanor read. She read the story of her own betrayal, laid out in cold, hard facts. She saw the depths of Julian's malice, the calculated cruelty of his plan, and she saw, in the thoroughness of Alistair's investigation, a man desperate to right an unforgivable wrong. The next afternoon, as Alistair was returning from a walk along the cliffs, he saw Thomas playing alone in the lane near the cottage. The boy was trying to fly a small, homemade kite, but the wind was tricky, and he was growing frustrated. Alistair hesitated, remembering his promise to keep his distance, but the sight of his son, so small and so determined, was too much to bear. He approached slowly. "Kites can be difficult," he said gently. Thomas looked up at him, his blue eyes serious. "The wind is a bully." Alistair smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Sometimes. May I see?" Thomas shyly handed him the kite. Alistair examined it, making a small adjustment to the tail. "You need to let the string out slowly," he explained, "and run into the wind, not away from it." He showed the boy how, running a few paces until the kite caught a gust and soared into the air, a tiny speck of color against the gray sky. He handed the string back to Thomas, whose face was alight with pure, unadulterated joy. Eleanor watched from the cottage window, her hand over her heart. She saw the easy way Alistair knelt to speak to their son, the shared smile, the identical shade of their eyes. She saw a father and a son. That evening, there was a knock on the door of his room at the inn. It was Mrs. Gable. "Mrs. Croft asks if you will join her and the boy for supper," the older woman said, her expression neutral. It was not forgiveness, but it was an invitation. The meal was simple, a thick fish stew, fresh bread, and cheese. It was the most magnificent feast Alistair had ever eaten. They spoke little. Thomas did most of the talking, chattering about his kite and asking Alistair 1,000 questions about the sea. Alistair answered each one patiently, his attention focused entirely on the boy. After Thomas was put to bed, they sat in silence by the fire. "He likes you," Eleanor said softly. "He is a wonderful boy," Alistair replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You have done an incredible job, Eleanor. He is kind, and bright, and resilient." "He is all I have," she said, looking into the flames. "He should have more," Alistair said quietly. "He should have a father. He should have his name." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. He opened it and tipped its contents into his palm. It was her wedding ring, the heavy gold band he had found on her nightstand 5 years ago. It had not left his person since. "I am not asking you to be my wife again," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Not yet. But this belongs to you. It is a symbol of a promise I broke. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to keep it." He held it out to her. She looked at the ring, then at his face, earnest and stripped of all artifice. She saw the man he was, and the man he was trying to become. She had survived. She had found her strength. She did not need him. But for the first time, she thought that perhaps she might want him. Slowly, she reached out and took the ring. She did not put it on. She simply closed her hand around it, the metal warm against her skin. "The stew is getting cold," she said. It was a beginning. They returned to Blackwood Manor a month later, not as a broken duke and his disgraced wife, but as a family tentatively finding its footing. The house felt different. Eleanor, no longer a frightened girl, but a woman of immense strength, refused to be cowed by its grandeur. She ordered windows thrown open, heavy curtains pulled back, and the cloying scent of potpourri replaced with the fresh smell of beeswax and lemon. Alistair followed her lead. He was a changed man, humbled and attentive. The power dynamic between them had been irrevocably altered. They were partners now, negotiating their new life together. He spent his days not in London, but at Blackwood, managing the estate with a new-found care, and his evenings with his son. He read to Thomas by the fire, taught him to ride a pony, and answered his endless questions about the stars. He was courting his own family, earning his place with patience and consistency. One evening, as they sat in the now bright and airy morning room, Thomas asleep on the rug by the fire, Eleanor looked at Alistair. He was watching their son, a look of profound love and quiet awe on his face. She held up her left hand. The wedding ring was on her finger. He saw it, and his breath caught. He looked at her, his eyes asking a question he did not dare to speak. She gave him a small, slow smile. "I believe," she said softly, "that a house where all find rest is a good foundation to build upon." Alistair reached across the space between them and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The fire crackled in the hearth, a warm and steady beat. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world was quiet. They were home.